The emergency beacon had been flashing red for 3 days straight in the council chambers. Director Vela pressed her crystalline hand against the control panel, feeling the vibrations of incoming priority messages from across the galaxy. Something was happening in the Outer Rim territories, something that made even the most seasoned military commanders send confused reports filled with words like impossible and unprecedented. Ambassador Tyron of the Saurid Empire slithered into the chamber, his scales reflecting the harsh light of the emergency displays. His reptilian eyes were narrow with frustration as he approached the central podium. Behind him, 11 other species. Representatives filed in, each looking more puzzled than the last. The collective's ambassador, Nira, buzzed with nervous energy, her hive mind connection making her anxiety spread to her nearby drones. The Trader Coalition's representative, Kent, kept checking his profit calculations, clearly disturbed by something. That was affecting commerce. "Fellow council members," Director Vela began, her voice carrying the authority of 10,000 years of diplomatic experience. "We have gathered because our established order faces something we have never encountered. The reports from the frontier worlds describe events that challenge everything we know about warfare, diplomacy, and conflict resolution." The holographic display activated, showing a 3-dimensional map of the galaxy. Red zones marked areas of recent conflict, but strangely, many of these zones were now marked with peaceful green indicators. This should have been good news, but the speed of these changes worried everyone present. Ambassador Tyron stepped forward, his forked tongue tasting the air nervously. "Director Vela, what we have witnessed defies all military logic. The humans have been interfering in established territorial disputes across 3 star systems, but their methods—" He paused, struggling to find words. "Their methods make no sense whatsoever." The display shifted to show battle footage from the Kepler sector. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as human ships approached, a group of notorious space raiders. But instead of weapons charging or shields activating, the human vessels began broadcasting something entirely unexpected. Music filled the communication channels. Actual music, with instruments and singing. Voices. "This was recorded 4 days ago," Tyron continued, his voice getting higher with disbelief. "The Crimson Fleet, the most feared pirates in 3 sectors, were preparing to attack a merchant convoy. The human patrol ships arrived and they started playing music. Then they began cooking something. In space. During a battle situation, the footage showed human crew members visible through transparent sections of their ships, apparently preparing food while their vessels slowly approached the pirate fleet. Some humans were playing instruments. Others seemed to be setting up what looked like games or sports equipment. The pirates, clearly as confused as the council members, had stopped their attack and were simply floating in space, apparently trying to understand what was happening." Ambassador Nira's compound eyes reflected the display as she spoke in her buzzing voice. "The mathematical probability of this approach succeeding should be 0. Our combat algorithms cannot process this data. It does not fit any known warfare patterns." "But it worked," said Ambassador Kent, his traitor instincts focusing on results. "The Crimson Fleet did not attack the merchant convoy. In fact, according to my sources, several pirate ships actually began escorting the merchants to safety. This makes no economic sense, but it happened." Director Vela manipulated the display to show more incidents. Each one was more baffling than the last. Human forces approaching hostile aliens with what appeared to be party supplies. Military vessels, carrying cooking equipment instead of extra weapons. Soldiers offering handmade gifts to enemies who had been shooting at them moments before. "The pattern repeats across multiple conflicts," she explained. "Humans arrive at battle zones, but instead of engaging in traditional combat, they begin activities that appear to be recreational, social, They invite their enemies to participate in games, share food, and engage in what their own reports describe as getting to know each other better. Ambassador Gorth of the agricultural Greenlands, an ancient being whose species had seen countless wars, spoke slowly. In my long lifetime, I have witnessed every form of warfare known to our galaxy. I have seen species fight with energy weapons, biological warfare, psychic attacks, and dimensional manipulation. But I have never seen anyone try to resolve conflict by teaching their enemies how to bake bread. The room fell silent as another piece of footage played. This one showed human soldiers who had been captured by hostile aliens. Instead of trying to escape or fight back, they were apparently teaching their captors card games and showing them pictures of Earth animals. The captors, fierce warriors from a species known for never taking prisoners, were sitting in a circle learning how to play what humans called poker. The success rate is impossible to ignore, Tyrant admitted reluctantly. Every human intervention has resulted in immediate cessation of hostilities. But more disturbing, these peace agreements seem to be lasting. Former enemies are now working together, trading with each other, even forming alliances. It goes against everything we understand about territorial disputes and resource conflicts. Ambassador Kree of the militaristic Iron Claw Federation stood up, his metallic exoskeleton clanking. This is clearly some form of advanced psychological warfare. The humans must be using unknown technology to manipulate the minds of their enemies. No species simply stops fighting because someone offers them a sandwich. We tested for that, Director Vela replied, calling up scientific analysis data. Our best xenopsychologists have examined the affected individuals. There are no signs of mental manipulation, no trace of unknown technologies or chemical influences. The subjects appear to have genuinely changed their attitudes through purely social interaction. The implications hung heavy in the chamber air. If humans could end conflicts through methods that cost almost nothing and left everyone better off than before, what did that mean for the established galactic order? The Council had spent millennia developing complex systems of military deterrence, economic sanctions, and diplomatic pressure. The idea that simple kindness and creativity could be more effective was deeply unsettling. We need answers, Director Vela declared. I am formally requesting that a human delegation be invited to address this council. We must understand how they achieve these results, and whether their methods represent a threat to galactic stability? Ambassador Tyron hissed softly. A threat to stability, or a threat to our understanding of how the universe works? The emergency beacon finally stopped flashing, but the questions it had raised were just beginning to illuminate how little the galaxy's most advanced civilizations understood about the power of genuine human kindness. Unity Prime's docking bay sensors detected the approaching human vessel long before it became visible to the naked eye. The ship was smaller than expected, roughly the size of a diplomatic courier rather than the imposing warship most council members had anticipated. When it finally docked, the first thing that surprised the waiting reception committee was the smell. Something pleasant and warm drifted from the human ship's airlock. Something that reminded several species of their homeworlds during celebration seasons. Ambassador Tyron, who had volunteered to lead the reception despite his skepticism, found his usually sharp senses confused by the unfamiliar but oddly comforting aroma. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and 3 humans stepped out. Admiral Rose Bennett walked first, her gray hair tied back in a simple style, and her uniform notably lacking the ceremonial decorations that most species wore to important diplomatic meetings. She carried what appeared to be a cloth bag instead of formal documentation or weapons. Captain Leo Torres followed her, grinning broadly at the assembled alien delegates as if he were meeting old friends rather than representing his species before. The galaxy's highest authority. His casual wave toward the reception committee caused several diplomatic translators to frantically check their databases for the gesture's meaning. Professor David Kim brought up the rear, but he seemed more interested in examining the station's architecture than paying attention to the formal proceedings. He kept pulling out a small device to record measurements and observations, occasionally muttering things like, "Fascinating design choice," and "I wonder how they solved the gravity differential problem." Director Vela approached the human delegation, her crystalline form reflecting the docking bay's lights in complex patterns that indicated formal diplomatic greeting among her people. "Welcome to Unity Prime, representatives of humanity. I am Director Vela, current mediator of the Galactic Council." Admiral Bennett smiled warmly and extended her hand in the human gesture of greeting. "Thank you for having us, Director Vela. I'm Admiral Rose Bennett, and I have to say, your station is absolutely beautiful. The way you've integrated living crystal with metal architecture is incredible." The simple compliment caught Director Vela off guard. In thousands of years of diplomatic receptions, no one had ever commented on the station's aesthetic qualities. They discussed defensive capabilities, economic advantages, or strategic positions, but never beauty. Ambassador Tyron slithered forward, his scales reflecting his irritation. "Admiral Bennett, we have not invited you here to discuss architecture. Your species has been interfering in established territorial disputes across multiple sectors. These interventions require immediate explanation." Captain Torres stepped up beside his admiral, still maintaining that easy smile. "Ambassador Tyron, right? We've heard a lot about the Saurid Empire's military achievements. Your people's tactical flexibility is legendary among human military academies." Again, the unexpected compliment disrupted the formal diplomatic rhythm. Tyron had prepared for defensiveness, justifications, or counter-accusations, but not genuine praise for his people's capabilities. "We have prepared quarters for your delegation in the diplomatic sector," Director Vela continued, trying to regain control of the proceedings. "The formal hearing will begin tomorrow morning, Council Standard Time." Admiral Bennett nodded appreciatively. "That's very kind of you. Actually, we brought something to share." She opened the cloth bag she had been carrying and pulled out what appeared to be a loaf of bread, still warm and emanating that pleasant aroma that had filled the docking bay. "It's called friendship bread. It's a tradition among humans to share food when meeting new people." The assembled delegates stared at the offered bread with a mixture of confusion and suspicion. Ambassador Nira's drones buzzed nervously as they analyzed the chemical composition of the strange offering. Ambassador Kent's trading instincts tried to calculate the economic value of baked grain products, but came up with numbers that made no sense in a diplomatic context. "Most of us cannot consume organic matter compatible with human digestion," Ambassador Tyron pointed out stiffly. "Oh, we know," Professor Kim said, finally looking up from his architectural observations. "That's not really the point. It's about the gesture. The offering of something you made yourself, something that took time and care to create. The actual consumption is less important than the intention behind it." This explanation only deepened the confusion among the diplomatic reception committee. The concept of performing actions for purely symbolic rather than practical purposes was familiar to them in religious or ceremonial contexts, but not in everyday social interaction. Director Vela decided to move the proceedings along. "We appreciate your gesture. Perhaps we should proceed to your quarters so you can prepare for tomorrow's hearing." As they moved through the station's corridors, the human delegation continued to behave in ways that puzzled their escorts. Admiral Bennett asked questions about the different species they passed, not about their military capabilities or economic resources, but about their cultures, their art, and what they found beautiful. Captain Torres complimented the efficiency of the station's layout and wondered aloud how different species had worked together to create such a functional design. Professor Kim kept stopping to examine architectural details, genuinely fascinated by the engineering solutions different species had contributed. "Your questions are unusual," Director Vela observed as they reached the diplomatic quarters. "Most visiting delegations inquire about strategic capabilities or trade opportunities." "Well, we're not most delegations," Admiral Bennett replied. "We're genuinely curious about how everyone lives, what makes them happy, what they're proud of. You can't really understand someone until you know what they care about." Ambassador Tyron, who had been growing more frustrated with each unconventional exchange, finally spoke up. "Admiral Bennett, your species stands accused of destabilizing established military and diplomatic protocols across 3 star systems. This is not a social gathering. This is a formal inquiry into actions that could be considered acts of war." For the first time since arriving, Admiral Bennett's expression grew serious, though not defensive. "Ambassador Tyron, we understand the gravity of the situation. We also understand that you've invited us here because our methods work, even though they don't make sense to you. Tomorrow, we'd like to show you why we do what we do, and maybe help you understand that there might be better ways to resolve conflicts than the ones the galaxy has been using." She paused, then smiled again. "But tonight, would you like to join us for dinner? We brought ingredients to cook something that most species can enjoy, and we'd love to hear about your worlds, your peoples, your favorite stories." The invitation hung in the air like a challenge wrapped in kindness. Every diplomatic protocol suggested that the council representatives should decline and maintain formal distance until the hearing. But something about the genuine warmth in the human admiral's voice made that response feel inadequate. Ambassador Tyron looked around at his colleagues, seeing his own confusion reflected in their faces. These humans were either the most sophisticated manipulators in the galaxy, or they were exactly what they appeared to be, a species that genuinely believed friendship was more powerful than weapons. Tomorrow's hearing would determine which possibility was true, but tonight, for the first time in diplomatic history, Unity Prime's formal corridors would echo with the sounds of different species sharing stories over a meal prepared by the galaxy's most puzzling newcomers. The council chamber had never hosted a camping demonstration before. Admiral Bennett and her team had arrived early, transforming the formal space into something that looked more like a recreational area than a diplomatic hearing room. Portable. Cooking equipment sat beside what appeared to be games and musical instruments. The sight made several council members visibly uncomfortable. Professor Kim was setting up holographic displays, while Captain Torres arranged chairs in a circle rather than the traditional formal rows. Admiral Bennett stood in the center of it all, looking completely relaxed, despite facing the scrutiny of 12 different species who could collectively decide humanity's fate in the galaxy. Director Vela took her position at the mediation podium, her crystalline form refracting the chamber's lights into complex patterns. "This hearing will determine whether humanity's intervention methods constitute a threat to galactic stability or represent a valid form of diplomatic engagement. Admiral Bennett, you have requested to present your case through demonstration rather than formal testimony." "That's correct, Director Vela," Admiral Bennett replied, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "We believe our methods are best understood through experience rather than explanation. What we do isn't complicated, but it is different from what you're used to." Ambassador Tyron coiled himself into a speaking position, his scales reflecting his skepticism. "Admiral, your forces have interfered in 17 separate conflicts in the past 6 months. Each intervention has violated established protocols for territorial dispute resolution. We require an explanation for these violations." Instead of responding with legal justifications or military doctrine, Admiral Bennett activated one of Professor Kim's holographic displays. The chamber filled with three-dimensional images of space, showing the recent encounter with the Crimson Fleet that had so puzzled the Council. "Let me show you what actually happened out there," she said, manipulating the display to focus on the human ships as they approached the pirate fleet. The Crimson Fleet had been terrorizing shipping lanes for over a decade. Traditional military responses had only made them more desperate and more violent. They were trapped in a cycle where the only way they knew how to survive was by taking from others. The display showed the pirates preparing for battle, their weapons charged and their formation aggressive. Then the human ships came into range, and everything changed. Instead of returning the aggressive posture, the human vessels began broadcasting. On open channels. "Captain Torres, would you like to explain what we did?" Admiral Bennett asked. Torres stood up, still wearing that easy smile that seemed to be his natural expression. "We started by doing something no one expected. We made ourselves vulnerable. We opened our communication channels and invited them to talk. But more than that, we showed them we weren't afraid of them." The holographic display shifted to show the interior of the human ships. Crew members were visible through transparent sections, and they were doing exactly what the earlier reports had described. Some were cooking, others were playing music, and several were engaged in what appeared to be recreational activities. "We were having a barbecue," Torres continued, and several council members made confused sounds. "We were cooking food, playing games, and basically showing the pirates that we were confident enough in our safety to enjoy ourselves. It was a form of psychological communication." Ambassador Nira's compound eyes focused intently on the display. "This appears to be either supreme confidence or supreme foolishness. Our analysis suggests the probability of survival using such tactics should approach zero." Professor Kim stepped forward, adjusting his holographic controls to show detailed scans of the pirate ships during the encounter. "That's where you're missing the key insight, Ambassador Nira. The pirates weren't just confused by our behavior. They were curious. For the first time in years, someone was treating them like they were interesting rather than threatening." The display zoomed in on the pirate vessels, showing crew members visible through their own transparent sections. Instead of maintaining battle readiness, they were gathering at viewing ports, watching the humans with obvious fascination. "We started broadcasting cooking shows," Admiral Bennett continued. "Captain Torres here is actually a pretty good chef, and he began teaching anyone who wanted to listen how to prepare various Earth dishes using ingredients that most species could safely consume." The footage showed something unprecedented in galactic military history. Pirates who had been preparing to attack merchant vessels were instead asking questions about spice combinations and cooking techniques. The tension that had defined the standoff was dissolving into genuine curiosity. "But the real breakthrough came when we challenged them to a competition," Torres added. "We said we'd bet our cooking against theirs. Winner takes all. But instead of betting cargo or territory, we bet stories. If they won, we'd tell them about Earth and human culture. If we won, they'd tell us about their worlds and their people." Ambassador Gorth, the ancient representative of the agricultural Greenlands, leaned forward with interest. "You wagered cultural exchange?" "Exactly," Admiral Bennett confirmed. "And that's when we learned something important. The Crimson Fleet wasn't just a group of pirates. They were refugees. Their home worlds had been destroyed in a territorial war between two major powers. They'd turned to piracy, not because they were evil, but because they were desperate and had no other way to survive." The holographic display shifted to show the aftermath of the encounter. Instead of a battle scene with destroyed ships and casualties, it showed something that looked more like a festival. Human and pirate vessels were docked together, with crew members moving freely between ships. The pirates were teaching humans about their advanced navigation techniques, while humans were sharing everything from cooking recipes to recreational games. Within 6 hours, the Crimson Fleet had agreed to work as escort vessels for merchant convoys, Admiral Bennett continued. They knew the space lanes better than anyone, and they had the skills to protect rather than prey on trade vessels. They just needed someone to give them a chance to use those skills constructively. Ambassador Chent, ever focused on practical results, consulted his datapad. My records show that shipping losses in that sector have decreased by 89% since this encounter. The former pirates now earn more as escort providers than they ever did through raids. That's the pattern we see everywhere, Professor Kim explained. Most conflicts aren't really about territory or resources. They're about recognition, belonging, and having a meaningful role to play. When we offer people alternatives that meet those deeper needs, they usually prefer cooperation to conflict. Director Vela studied the holographic data with growing amazement. You are suggesting that these pirates changed their entire way of life because you offered them friendship and respect? We offered them what every sentient being wants, Admiral Bennett replied simply. A chance to be seen as more than their worst moments, an opportunity to contribute something positive, and inclusion in a community that values them. Ambassador Tyron's scales reflected his internal struggle with these concepts. This approach requires tremendous trust. What if they had simply attacked you during your barbecue? Captain Torres grinned. Then we would have defended ourselves. We're not naive, Ambassador. But we've learned that most beings, when given the choice between violence and friendship, will choose friendship if they believe the friendship is genuine. The chamber fell silent as the implications settled over the assembled delegates. The humans weren't using advanced technology or sophisticated psychological manipulation. They were using something far more dangerous to established power structures. They were treating everyone they met as potentially valuable friends rather than threats to be managed. We have 17 more case studies to share, Admiral Bennett said quietly. Each one shows the same pattern. When you approach conflict with curiosity instead of fear, with generosity instead of suspicion, you often discover that your enemies were just people who needed better options. The demonstration continued, but the real revelation was already complete. Humanity had weaponized the one thing that no military academy in the galaxy taught: the radical assumption that every being they encountered might become a friend if given the right opportunity. The silence that followed the human demonstration lasted exactly 37 seconds before Ambassador Tyron erupted from his coiled position like a striking serpent. His scales had shifted to the deep red coloration that indicated extreme agitation among his people, and his forked tongue flicked rapidly as he struggled to find words adequate to express his outrage. "This is madness," he hissed, his voice carrying across the chamber with unmistakable authority. "Admiral Bennett, what you describe is not diplomacy or military strategy. It is dangerous precedent-setting that undermines 10,000 years of established galactic order. You speak of friendship and cooking competitions as if they were legitimate tools of conflict resolution." He slithered closer to the center of the chamber, his imposing form dwarfing the human delegation. "The Saurid Empire has maintained peace and stability through strength, clear hierarchies, and predictable responses to aggression. When pirates attack trade vessels, they face consequences that deter future attacks. When territorial disputes arise, they are resolved through established protocols that all species understand and respect." Ambassador Tyron gestured toward the holographic displays that still showed images of humans and former pirates working together. "Your methods introduce chaos into systems that have worked for millennia. What happens when your friendship fails? What happens when the next group of raiders realizes they can manipulate your emotions to avoid real consequences for their actions? Admiral Bennett remained seated in her casual circle arrangement, apparently unfazed by the towering reptilian diplomat's intimidating presence. Ambassador Tyron, I understand your concerns. Your people have built an impressive civilization based on order and strength. But I have to ask you something. Has that approach actually eliminated piracy and territorial conflicts, or has it just managed them? The question struck at something fundamental in Tyron's worldview. He coiled back slightly, his scales flickering between red and their normal green coloration. Management of conflict is the goal of any reasonable civilization. Complete elimination of conflict is impossible. But what if it isn't? Captain Torres interjected, standing up from his chair with that characteristic easy movement. What if the reason conflicts keep recurring is because the underlying issues are never actually addressed? You defeat pirates, but you don't address what made them become pirates in the first place. You resolve territorial disputes, but you don't address why different species felt they needed that particular territory. Ambassador Nira of the Collective buzzed forward, her compound eyes reflecting multiple angles of the debate. Captain Torres, your logic contains a fundamental flaw. The Collective has analyzed thousands of conflict scenarios across galactic history. Aggressive behaviors follow predictable patterns based on resource scarcity, territorial imperatives, and species-specific dominance hierarchies. These patterns cannot be altered through social interaction. Her drones arranged themselves in a complex formation that enhanced her cognitive processing. Your methods introduce variables that cannot be calculated or controlled. The success rate you demonstrate may be statistical anomaly rather than replicable methodology. Our hive mind processing capabilities indicate a 73% probability that your approach will fail catastrophically when applied to conflicts involving resource-scarce environments or ideologically motivated aggressors. Professor Kim stepped forward, pulling out his datapad and projecting additional holographic information. Ambassador Nira, we appreciate the Collective's analytical capabilities, but we think your models might be missing some important variables. Human anthropologists have studied conflict resolution across hundreds of cultures on our home world, and we've found that even the most resource-scarce societies usually prefer cooperation when they believe cooperation will meet their needs. Better than conflict. The debate was interrupted by the deep, resonant voice of Ambassador Gorth, the ancient representative of the agricultural Greenlands. His tree-like form creaked as he shifted position, and his voice carried the weight of countless centuries of experience. I have witnessed more wars than any being in this chamber, he said slowly, each word carefully considered. I have seen species destroy themselves over resources that could have been shared. I have watched civilizations collapse because they could not imagine alternatives to violence. But I have also seen something else. He paused, his bark-like skin reflecting the chamber's lights and patterns that spoke of deep contemplation. I have seen the Greenlands prosper for 12,000 years not through military might, but through the simple practice of ensuring that everyone who comes to our worlds leaves better fed than when they arrived. It is a philosophy similar to what these humans describe. Ambassador Kent of the Trader Coalition consulted his profit calculations with growing excitement. Ambassador Gorth raises an important point. From a purely economic perspective, the human approach shows remarkable efficiency. Traditional conflict resolution requires enormous investments in military hardware, peacekeeping forces, and damage repair. The human method achieves better results at a fraction of the cost. He projected his own holographic display showing shipping route efficiency data. In sectors where humans have intervened, trade volume has increased by an average of 230%. Former conflict zones are now requesting additional trade partnerships. Pirates have become productive members of the galactic economy. The economic benefits alone justify serious consideration of their methods. But Ambassador Kree of the Iron Claw Federation was having none of it. His metallic exoskeleton clanked as he stood to full height, weapon ports visible along his arms still sealed but clearly present. This discussion ignores fundamental realities of galactic civilization. There are species in this galaxy that understand only strength. There are conflicts that cannot be resolved through shared meals and recreational activities. His voice took on the harsh mechanical quality that indicated maximum skepticism among his people. What happens when humans encounter the Void Hunters? What happens when they face the Devourer swarms or the Machine Collective? Will they offer cooking lessons to beings that exist only to consume or destroy? Will they play games with entities that cannot be reasoned with? Admiral Bennett finally stood, her movement fluid and confident despite facing criticism from some of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. Ambassador Kree, you're absolutely right that there are some conflicts that can't be resolved through friendship. But here's the thing we've learned. Until you try the friendship approach, you can't actually know which conflicts those are. She gestured toward the holographic displays, cycling through different case studies. Every being we've encountered, our military experts initially classified as unreasonable or impossible to negotiate with. The Crimson Fleet was supposed to be psychopathically violent. The Border Raiders were supposed to be incapable of cooperation. The Savage Stars were supposed to be literally savage. Captain Torres rejoined the conversation with a grin. Turns out a lot of beings get classified as unreasonable simply because no one has ever tried to understand what they actually want or need. We're not saying our approach works 100% of the time. We're saying it works often, enough to be worth trying before you resort to weapons. The debate continued for hours, with positions hardening and emotions running higher. Ambassador Tyron accused humanity of weaponizing friendship and manipulating other species through false kindness. Ambassador Nira questioned the long-term sustainability of peace achieved through such unpredictable methods. Ambassador Kree warned that human naivety would eventually encounter something that would destroy them and potentially endanger the entire galaxy. But other voices emerged in support. Ambassador Gorth spoke of the wisdom in trying kindness before violence. Ambassador Kent presented economic arguments that were hard to ignore. Even some of the smaller species representatives began sharing stories of conflicts in their own territories that had persisted for generations because all sides had forgotten what they were originally fighting about. As the debate raged, Director Vela found herself contemplating something unprecedented in her long diplomatic career. The humans had not just presented an alternative approach to conflict resolution. They had forced the entire council to confront fundamental assumptions about the nature of civilization, the inevitability of conflict, and the possibility that the galaxy's most advanced species might have been overlooking solutions that were hiding in plain sight. The question was no longer whether humanity's methods worked. The evidence for that was overwhelming. The question was whether the Galactic Council was ready to admit that a species barely 2 centuries into space travel might have discovered something that 10,000 years of galactic civilization had missed. 18 hours had passed since the debate began, and the council chamber showed signs of the marathon session. Empty food containers from various species dotted the space, evidence that even formal diplomatic proceedings eventually surrendered to basic biological needs. Several delegates had shifted positions multiple times, their different physiologies adapting to the extended discussion in ways that would have seemed impossible at the session's beginning. Director Vela stood at the center of the chamber, her crystalline form now showing subtle stress fractures that indicated the enormous mental effort she had expended, mediating between 12 different species with 12 different perspectives on humanity's revolutionary approach to conflict resolution. The weight of the decision before them was unlike anything in galactic diplomatic history. "Fellow council members," she began, her voice carrying the exhaustion of someone who had spent nearly a full day cycle trying to bridge fundamental philosophical differences. "We have heard extensive testimony, witnessed demonstrations, and engaged in thorough debate. The time has come for formal decision-making regarding humanity's intervention methods." She activated the chamber's official voting system, causing individual response panels to illuminate at each delegate's position. "The question before us is whether to officially sanction humanity's unconventional tactics as violations of established galactic law, or to recognize them as valid diplomatic methodology within our existing framework." Ambassador Tyron coiled himself into his formal voting position, his scales now showing the deep blue coloration that indicated serious contemplation among his people. Despite his earlier objections, the hours of debate had clearly affected him. "Director Vela, before we proceed, I wish to make one final statement." He turned toward the human delegation, who had maintained their calm demeanor throughout the entire proceedings. "Admiral Bennett, your people have presented evidence that challenges core assumptions of Saurid military doctrine. This is difficult for us to accept. However, I cannot ignore the results you have achieved." His pause stretched long enough that several delegates shifted nervously. "The Saurid Empire values strength, but we also value effectiveness. If your methods prove more effective at achieving lasting peace than our traditional approaches, then perhaps it is time for us to reconsider what true strength actually means." Ambassador Nira's drones buzzed in complex patterns as she processed her response. "The collective has completed extensive analysis of the data presented during this session. While our original probability calculations suggested low success rates, for human methods, the empirical evidence contradicts our theoretical models. This suggests that our understanding of conflict psychology may be incomplete." She paused, her compound eyes reflecting the chamber's lights in ways that indicated deep cognitive processing. "The collective will support recognition of human methods, but we request comprehensive monitoring and data collection to improve our predictive models for future applications." One by one, the delegates voiced their positions. Ambassador Gorth spoke with the quiet confidence of age, noting that 12,000 years of agricultural civilization had taught his people the value of nurturing growth rather than destroying opposition. Ambassador Kent presented final economic projections that showed stunning improvements in trade and prosperity in human-mediated sectors. But Ambassador Kree remained unconvinced. "The Iron Claw Federation cannot support methods that leave civilizations vulnerable to truly hostile forces. While humans have achieved success in specific scenarios, we maintain that their approach will fail catastrophically when confronted with existential threats." The debate continued for another hour as delegates wrestled with the implications of their decision. Some species saw opportunity in humanity's methods, others saw dangerous naivety, and still others struggled to reconcile the undeniable results with their fundamental understanding of how the universe worked. Finally, Director Vela called for the formal vote. "All those in favor of recognizing humanity's intervention methods as valid diplomatic methodology, activate your approval indicators." The chamber filled with the soft sounds of various species operating their voting systems. Lights appeared on the central display, each representing a different civilization's choice. Green for approval, red for rejection, yellow for abstention. The count proceeded slowly as each delegate finalized their decision. 7 green lights appeared on the display. The Greenlands, the Trader Coalition, the Collective, 3 smaller species councils, and, surprisingly, the Saurid Empire. 4 red lights represented the Iron Claw Federation and 3 other militaristic civilizations. One yellow light indicated abstention from a species still struggling with the philosophical implications. Director Vela studied the results with amazement. By a margin of 7-4 with one abstention, the Galactic Council officially recognizes humanity's intervention methods as valid diplomatic methodology. However, given the revolutionary nature of these techniques, they will be subject to comprehensive monitoring and evaluation over a 5-year probationary period. Admiral Bennett stood, her expression showing relief mixed with determination. Director Vela, members of the Council, we accept these terms gratefully. We've always believed that our methods should be judged by their results, and we welcome the opportunity to demonstrate their effectiveness under formal observation. She gestured toward her colleagues. Captain Torres and Professor Kim will be establishing a training program for any species that wishes to experiment with our approaches. We're not trying to replace existing diplomatic methods, but to add new tools to the galactic community's toolkit for peace. Professor Kim stepped forward with his characteristic enthusiasm for cross-cultural exchange. We're particularly excited about learning from each of your civilizations. The Saurid Empire's understanding of hierarchy could help us work with species that value clear command structures. The collective's analytical capabilities could help us predict which conflicts might be most suitable for our approaches. Captain Torres added with his usual grin, and we're hoping some of you might be willing to try cooking with us. You'd be amazed how many diplomatic breakthroughs happen when people are sharing a meal they prepared together. The formal vote had been cast, but the real transformation was only beginning. Over the following months, reports began flowing back to Unity Prime that would have seemed like science fiction just a year earlier. Former war zones were hosting interspecies cultural festivals. Ex-pirates were teaching navigation techniques to merchant crews in exchange for cooking lessons and storytelling sessions. Ancient territorial disputes were being resolved through collaborative art projects and competitive sporting events. Ambassador Tyron's first attempt at implementing friendship protocols in a Saurid border dispute resulted in what military historians would later call the galaxy's first diplomatic barbecue battle. Two rival factions who had been fighting over mining rights for decades ended up in a cooking competition that evolved into a joint mining operation where both sides shared the resources and the recipes. The collective's attempts were more systematic but equally surprising. They began incorporating social satisfaction variables into their conflict analysis models, discovering that many disputes they had classified as resource-based were actually about recognition and respect. Their success rate in mediation improved by over 60% once they started addressing emotional needs alongside practical concerns. Not every attempt succeeded. Ambassador Kree's prediction proved accurate in several cases where human-style approaches met with genuine hostility or incomprehension. The Iron Claw Federation documented 12 separate incidents where friendship overtures were met with increased aggression. But even these failures provided valuable data about which conflicts required traditional responses and which might benefit from alternative approaches. 6 months after the Council vote, Director Vela received a priority message. That would have been unthinkable during the original hearings. The Crimson Fleet, now operating as the galaxy's most successful merchant escort service, was requesting permission to establish a permanent cultural exchange program with Unity Prime. They wanted to teach other former military groups how to transition from conflict to cooperation. The message included recordings of former pirates discussing their transformation with obvious pride and satisfaction. They spoke about feeling valued for their skills rather than feared for their desperation. They described the relief of no longer living constantly on the edge of violence, and the unexpected joy they had found in protecting rather than preying upon galactic commerce. But perhaps the most significant change was happening within the Council itself. Delegates who had spent centuries maintaining careful diplomatic distance were beginning to share personal stories, cultural traditions, and even meals during their sessions. The formal chamber still hosted official proceedings, but increasingly, important discussions were happening in the informal spaces where species mixed freely and got to know each other as individuals rather than representatives. Ambassador Gorth observed the changes with ancient wisdom. In 12,000 years of diplomatic service, I have never seen such rapid transformation in interspecies relations. The humans have not just introduced new methods. They have reminded us that beneath all our differences, most beings share the same fundamental desires for safety, recognition, and belonging. Director Vela's final report on the 5-year probationary period would become required reading in diplomatic academies across the galaxy. Her conclusions were both simple and revolutionary. Humanity had not discovered some advanced technology or sophisticated manipulation technique. They had simply refused to accept the assumption that conflict was inevitable and enemies were permanent. The report documented measurable improvements in galactic stability, trade prosperity, and interspecies cooperation. But more importantly, it recorded something harder to quantify but impossible to ignore. The galaxy had become a more hopeful place. Species that had viewed each other with suspicion for millennia were discovering they had more in common than they had differences. The human approach had its limitations and failures, as Ambassador Kree had predicted. Not every conflict could be resolved with friendship and creativity, but the galaxy had learned that far more conflicts fell into that category than anyone had previously imagined. As Director Vela transmitted her final report to the archives, she included one personal observation that would be quoted in diplomatic texts for generations to come. Humanity's greatest contribution to galactic civilization may not be their peaceful methods but their dangerous optimism. They have infected us with the radical belief that beings who seem like enemies might simply be friends we haven't met yet. The emergency beacon that had started this entire transformation no longer flashed in the council chambers. The galaxy still faced conflicts and challenges, but now it faced them with a larger toolkit and a more hopeful perspective. Humanity had taught the galaxy's most advanced civilizations that sometimes the most sophisticated solution was also the simplest. 1. Treat others as if they might surprise you with their capacity for goodness, and more often than not, they will.